I remember the day I first noticed something was off in my marriage. It was a Thursday morning, and I was sorting through our bills at the kitchen table. My wife, Lauren, was still asleep, so I was alone with the endless stream of statements and receipts. I typically left our finances on autopilot, trusting that we contributed equally and kept each other informed about any major expenses. But something about that morning made me dig deeper than usual. When I tried to reconcile my checking account with my credit card statements, there was an unsettling discrepancy. A few $1,000s had vanished, and I had no recollection of spending it. Concerned, but not yet alarmed, I assumed there might be an error in the bank's system or some oversight on my part. I never suspected Lauren could be responsible for that missing money. I began my investigation in a careful, methodical way. I printed copies of every transaction, highlighted anything I didn't recognize, and sorted them chronologically. One payment stood out immediately, a lump sum of $3,000 wired to an account I had never seen before. The transfer was labeled innocently enough, something about travel expenses, but I'd never authorized it, and neither had my bank flagged it as suspicious. My initial thought was that maybe Lauren booked something for the two of us, like a surprise vacation. She had teased me about wanting to take a real break somewhere out of town. However, she never mentioned spending thousands of dollars, and we normally communicated about big purchases. My gut twisted with worry. Still, I told myself there must be some rational explanation that had nothing to do with betrayal or lying. I confronted Lauren later that day. My approach was gentle at first. I told her I'd found a strange wire transfer labeled for travel, asked if she knew anything about it, and tried to read her reaction. She looked startled, but not in a guilty way, more like she was taken aback by my sudden interest in finances. She claimed she didn't recall any wire transfer of that size, suggested maybe the bank made a mistake, and offered to go with me to sort it out. Her calmness disarmed me, so I let it go for the moment. That evening, I watched her as we sat together on the couch, and everything seemed normal. She laughed at the same shows, scrolled her phone with the same bored expression, and even leaned on my shoulder like she always did. If she was hiding something, she played it convincingly. Over the next few days, I tried not to obsess about that transfer, but I couldn't help myself. Every time Lauren left the house, I found myself sneaking a look at her laptop or searching through receipts in the trash. I felt like a detective, and it was exhausting. I discovered small clues that began to fit together in a disturbing pattern. A receipt for a fancy hotel in Miami, a suspicious email confirming an airline reservation, and an unusual text message notification that popped up on her phone. I didn't get a full look at the message, but the words, "Can't wait to see you," were enough to set my heart racing. I wasn't ready to confront her without proof, but my suspicions grew stronger by the hour. It felt like my entire marriage was balancing on a cliff, and I was terrified of what lay below. Eventually, I did something I'm not proud of. I installed spyware on her phone. It felt invasive and immoral, but I had to confirm what was really happening. Within days, I found exactly what I feared: messages between Lauren and a man named Eric. They'd been carrying on what seemed like a full-blown affair for months, sharing their fantasies, complaining about me, and planning a secret trip. I felt nauseated reading the details. She had used my money to book a luxurious getaway for the two of them. The date was approaching in just a week, and she'd planned to tell me she was going on a work retreat with colleagues. I was furious and heartbroken all at once. Part of me wanted to confront her instantly, but another part wanted to play it smart, gather more evidence, and ensure I had a strategy that would truly protect my interests. I decided to consult a lawyer. I knew that confronting Lauren without a legal safety net could backfire. During my lunch break, I visited a local family law attorney who specialized in divorce and financial disputes. I brought a folder of documents and the screenshots from her messages. He listened carefully, nodding as I explained the situation. Then he laid out my options. I could file for divorce immediately, freeze joint accounts, and potentially sue for the stolen money. Alternatively, I could gather more evidence, wait until Lauren actually took the trip, and then catch her in the act. He warned me about the emotional toll of each choice, but I was fixated on the sense of betrayal pulsing through my veins. Part of me just wanted revenge. I wanted her to experience the same feeling of shock and humiliation she had inflicted on me. I went home that night and pretended everything was normal. Lauren told me she had an upcoming work trip, and I played along. asking the usual questions about her itinerary. She seemed relieved by my nonchalance. Meanwhile, I quietly transferred most of our joint savings into a new account under my name only. I left enough funds behind to keep appearances, but not enough for her to pull another stunt. I also started separating key financial documents, removing my name from any shared bills that I could. It was a slow process, but it felt oddly empowering. Each step was a reminder that I would no longer be her fool. Whenever she smiled at me with that faux warmth, I smiled back, knowing I had the upper hand. It was unsettling how easily I slipped into deception, but I felt she deserved nothing less. The day before her supposed work trip, she was busy packing. I peeked into the bedroom and watched her fold clothes I'd never seen before, items too casual and beachy for a professional conference. She noticed me lurking, so I quickly asked if she needed help, playing the role of concerned husband. She smiled, said she was fine, and continued. I could feel my blood boiling, but I maintained a calm demeanor, telling her I had to step out for some errands. In truth, I was heading to the bank to finalize a freeze on the credit card she typically used. I would let her board that plane and check into her hotel with Eric, only to find her card declined when she tried to charge the room. It was petty, but it was the only way I knew how to show her that I wasn't a doormat. The morning of her flight, she left the house with a quick kiss on my cheek, saying she'd call me once she landed. I said, "Have a great trip," and forced a smile. The moment she was gone, I called my lawyer, letting him know she was en route. He advised me to stay calm and follow through with our plan. I spent the day pacing, unable to focus on anything else. Around midday, I got a text from Lauren's phone saying her flight was delayed. She sounded annoyed, but it was impossible for me to feel sympathy. I knew exactly why she was truly annoyed. She wanted to meet up with Eric as soon as possible. I tried not to imagine them together, but the images flooded my mind anyway. Every second felt like a fresh betrayal. Rage simmered beneath my composure, but I kept reminding myself that my plan was in motion. She finally arrived at her hotel sometime that evening. I waited anxiously for any update. Right on schedule, around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lauren. "Made it, super tired, going to bed early." I almost laughed at the audacity. I knew from her messages with Eric that they intended to meet in the bar around that time. A few minutes later, I logged into the credit card account to check if any charges had been attempted. Sure enough, there was a decline at the hotel's front desk. My heart pounded with dark satisfaction. I pictured her confusion, maybe even a flicker of terror that I'd discovered everything. But as gratifying as it felt, I also felt the weight of sadness. This was the woman I once loved, and now I was orchestrating her downfall. It was a strange mixture of triumph and regret. Curiosity ate at me, and I opened the spyware dashboard to see if she was messaging Eric about the declined card. The conversation was raging. She was panicking, accusing the bank of incompetence, and claiming she had no idea why the card wouldn't work. Eric was urging her to call me and sort it out. She hesitated, probably afraid to blow her cover. Finally, she texted me, "Hey, having some issues with the card? Could you call the bank?" I waited a good 10 minutes before responding with a single line. "I'll look into it tomorrow." That must have driven her nuts. I imagined them stuck at the front desk, forced to use Eric's card instead. Their romantic weekend was already tainted by stress. I took a grim sort of pleasure in it, though a small part of me felt disgusted by how vengeful I'd become. The next morning, I messaged her back, claiming the bank had told me there was suspected fraud and the account was temporarily frozen. She kept insisting she needed me to fix it immediately, and I played dumb, saying I would handle it on Monday. Meanwhile, I continued checking the spyware. She was furious, venting to Eric that I was useless and that this was the last thing she needed. He tried to reassure her, but it was clear he was annoyed about footing the bills. I wondered how deep his pockets were and whether he'd think twice about continuing the affair if it meant covering every expense. I felt a grim satisfaction imagining their arguments. It was a twisted scenario, but I couldn't deny a certain sense of justice. After all, she was the one who had stolen from me and lied to my face. I refused to bail her out, not after she'd betrayed me so thoroughly. By Saturday evening, they'd managed to check into the room, presumably using Eric's card. The phone calls from Lauren became less frequent, replaced by short, clipped texts. She tried to maintain the facade, mentioning how exhausted she was from all the workshops. I responded politely but never addressed the card issue. Despite my anger, I felt a pang of heartbreak imagining her in another man's arms. Still, that bitterness fueled my resolve. I spent the weekend finalizing paperwork for the divorce. My lawyer sent me drafts to review, and I made sure to include a clause demanding full reimbursement of the stolen money. Part of me wanted to expose her publicly, but I also wanted to protect myself from any countersuits. My lawyer reminded me that discreet action was often the most powerful. Let her dig her own grave, he said, and then present the evidence when it matters most. When she returned home on Sunday night, I was in the kitchen, casually sipping a beer. She walked in with her suitcase and the usual forced smile, but I could sense her tension. We exchanged pleasantries, and she quickly headed to take a shower. I knew she wanted to avoid any conversation about the trip. She emerged later in pajamas, hair damp, and sat across from me at the dining table. Her eyes flickered with nervous energy, but she tried to act normal, asking about my weekend. I kept my responses brief, not giving her any opening to question me. Finally, she tried to address the credit card issue, saying she'd talked to the bank herself and claimed it was some mix-up. I pretended to believe her, acting relieved that everything was resolved. Deep down, I was already envisioning the moment I would unleash everything I knew. I just needed the final pieces to fall into place. The next few days were agonizing. Every time I saw her, I felt a wave of anger mixed with sadness. She acted as if nothing happened, occasionally dropping hints about how stressful the work retreat had been. I nodded along, fighting the urge to scream. Meanwhile, I coordinated with my lawyer to set a date to serve her the divorce papers. He suggested waiting until Friday afternoon so she'd have the weekend to process the shock. I agreed, though the waiting tested my patience. I spent my evenings compiling every piece of evidence: the wire transfer details, the screenshots of her messages with Eric, the receipts for the hotel, and the phone logs that proved she'd lied. Each document was a reminder of how deeply she'd betrayed me. There was no going back to normal after this. I was done playing the forgiving spouse. Friday arrived, and my nerves were on edge all morning. Lauren left for work without suspecting a thing. I'd arranged for a process server to meet her at home that afternoon, just as she returned. She usually got back around 5, so I made sure to clear my schedule. I waited in the living room, imagining the look on her face when she'd find a stranger on our doorstep, handing her the papers that signaled the end of our marriage. The hours ticked by slowly. Around 4:30, I received a text from her saying she'd be working late. My heart sank, worried she might not come home until much later, complicating my plan. But the process server reassured me he could wait. At 6:15, her car pulled into the driveway. I peeked through the curtain, my pulse hammering in my ears as I saw the server approach her. She walked in a few minutes later, pale and visibly rattled. Her hands shook as she clutched the envelope. I stood up, and we locked eyes. For a brief moment, she looked like a stranger to me, someone I used to know but had changed beyond recognition. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Finally, she managed to whisper, "You're divorcing me?" I nodded, crossing my arms. She stared at the papers, flipping through the pages that detailed her betrayal, the stolen money, the affair with Eric. Her face crumpled with shame and anger. She tried to throw the papers on the floor, but she was too shaky to make it dramatic. I watched her crumble right there in our living room. That's when she started screaming, accusations, denials, every excuse in the book. I didn't flinch, just stood there, arms crossed, letting her unravel. She begged me to reconsider, claimed it was a one-time mistake, that she'd been lonely, that I'd driven her into Eric's arms. She accused me of neglect, of working too much, of failing to understand her emotional needs. I listened in silence, but my mind was made up. I had read the messages, seen her plan the trip, watched her lie to my face without hesitation. Nothing she said could erase the cold reality of what she'd done. I told her I wanted her out of the house by the end of the month, that I'd already moved most of our money and closed our joint accounts. The look of betrayal on her face almost made me laugh. How ironic that she felt betrayed by me now. She shouted some more, threatened she'd fight me in court. I simply responded, "Do what you need to do." In the weeks that followed, she tried various tactics to win me back or intimidate me into dropping the divorce. She left tearful voicemails, wrote letters apologizing and claiming she'd always loved me. Then she swung to anger, hiring her own lawyer and vowing to take everything she could. I met each maneuver with calm determination. My own lawyer was well prepared. We had the evidence of her affair, the financial misdeeds, and even her written confession in text messages. Lauren's threats didn't stand a chance. Meanwhile, Eric seemingly dropped out of the picture. From what I gathered, he didn't want the drama or the potential financial burden. She ended up alone, scrambling to find a place to live and trying to salvage her reputation among our friends. Some turned against her once they learned the truth. Others pitied her. I felt neither pity nor sympathy. She'd sown these seeds of deceit, and now she was forced to reap the bitter harvest. In the end, the divorce was granted swiftly. The court ordered her to repay the money she had stolen, and she lost any claim to spousal support. Her job found out about the deceit after a coworker saw the legal papers, and management quietly let her go soon after. I heard she spent a few months couch surfing, struggling to piece her life together. Every so often, I'd receive a pathetic text from her, asking for another chance, or cursing me for ruining her life. I never responded. I'd already made my choice. Karma had a way of catching up with her without me lifting a finger. My revenge was complete, and there was nothing left to say. I walked away from that chapter of my life with my head held high, determined never to repeat those mistakes. Some people might expect a moral about forgiveness, but I found none. Betrayal was a line she chose to cross, and I chose to let her drown in the consequences. And that, I believe, is the only justice she ever truly deserved.